That's what
and
it
it is
looks
the
like.
first time in my memory that a president has gotten up and talked about affordability in war. We've had everybody talk about guns and butter. Nobody ever wants to make the choice. And affordability
is he tuned into the national psyche. We're in a recession.
That's right. And our economic security is as important as our
What about the human lives component that we saw on the scene? Do you feel happy or okay with sending more and more soldiers in there to get cut up and wounded?
More and more. He's bringing them home.
Oh, that's not true. In Iraq, he is replacing people.
Well, no doubt, but no president, I think, ever wants to send troops.
Well, why do it? You don't have the justification. If there's not a crying national security need, you can't send people. We are guaranteed under the Constitution and our founding fathers life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life becomes first.
John, I don't disagree with that, but when you have the national security interests of the United States as determined by the executive branch, it is the president who has the power to make war, as you know, and this is something which he has to decide, and you have to pay attention to his decisions.
This country has become accustomed to the face of war. And it is, I think it's a species.
They don't like it.
Opposed to
they don't know. They've become accustomed to it.
No.
We've been living by it. We've been living in it.
For the first time.
And it's been used as a defense against Al-Qaeda. And now we have seen the slain leader of Al-Qaeda. We're still in that mode, and he wants to, gradually get out of it.
Well, that's why we went. Look, when we went into Afghanistan, we didn't do it just casually, right? We suffered this enormous attack at home. Okay, that just transformed American politics and the American view of the world. And there was a sense we had to do something and respond.
What did Eisenhower say? He said, beware of the military-industrial complex. There's money to be made in war. Follow the money. Follow the money.
But what about I don't think that was the rationale for our going into either Afghanistan or Iraq.
Not in the president's mind, I'm sure.
This is a war he inherited.
The national lobby for it.
We've
grown accustomed to war. War is the most evil feature of civilization today, and it always has been. It can only be made justified by a series of 4 propositions. The first of which is the legitimacy of your national security as a towering need for this particular kind of action to be taken.
Well, this is a war that
can we get that straight?
Yes, I don't. But we are faced with a situation in which we are looking at a different kind of war. A different kind of war, people who come in and attack our civilian sites.
Well, wait a minute.
Okay, and the question is, how do you stop them? We had a sense that we had to do something about Al-Qaeda.
Oh, we've been feeding off that.
Yes, for a long time. And I'm not saying we did the right things. I was opposed to the president's policy in Afghanistan, for example. I believed in an
this is a war he inherited, and the immediate reason for going in there, which was their harboring of bin Laden, is now gone.
Okay, I feel better about Barack hearing that from you.
Okay, to find a responsible way out, and the cost of war is a whole other issue about all the special interests embedded in our defense industry. But that's a whole other issue. Aside from this president saying we're going to get out of Afghanistan.
Okay, well, you saw the figures on the screen of how much these wars are costing us.
Right.
Yes, and that's why I said affordability
not the intrinsic training on the ground, it's the warcraft.
Affordability has finally entered into the equation.
Okay, the brutal wars.
We have spent $1 trillion on war at a time of rising debt and hard economic times. Now we must invest in America's greatest resource, our people.
The actual total figure of both wars is $1,250 billion. $806 billion in Iraq, $444 billion in Afghanistan. Again, the total $1,250 billion.
Question: did President Obama in his televised address justify the Afghan involvement on grounds of vital national security interests? I ask you again, Michelle Bernard.
If you read in between the lines, he did. He absolutely did. I personally am somebody I'm actually glad at the rate of withdrawal. I know there are people who think that it's too slow. I think the rate that he came up with is appropriate. I think that the American public deserved to hear a little bit more about why we will continue to have troops there after he brings back or withdraws the 33,000 that he talked about earlier this week. People need to understand the conditions on the ground. You talk about war in the United States as a national security issue, but one of the things that we don't don't want to do either as a nation, and war is horrible. No one wants to engage in war, but we also don't want to become numb to human suffering all over the world. And I think if you would talk to former President Clinton, for example, and President Bush, you know, the fact that people can watch television and watch the genocide that has happened in Sudan and sit back and do nothing. As a nation, we are the greatest nation on earth. We have the greatest democracy in the world. How can you look back? How can you look at the women in Iraq or Afghanistan or Iran who are raped as a tool of war, who are not allowed to be educated, who are forced to dress in clothing that where you can't see anything of them because they are rated as second-rate citizens? Nowhere in this world will we have a democracy or will our country be safe when you can demoralize half your population.
You still have to make the intellectual leap for relieving the situation of misery, or as the case in the Sudan, split government and so forth, relieving it through war. And that is a terrific ladder to get up, to see war as actually relieving that rather than compounding it, because you're going to probably make more enemies on all sides. Look militaristic.
It is a difficult choice.
There are other ways to attack the problem that are far more efficient than fleeing into the war bag.
Listen. There are some terrible countries that you can change those countries via, more trade, opening them up. Maybe that's how we deal with Iran. But there are some very bad countries led by very bad men which need to be the hard kill, decapitated. And Iraq was one of them.
You're talking about Libya?
Yeah, I'm talking about Libya as well.
Well, that vote was defeated.
I understand that.
That vote is not up there.
There are some countries led by these countries are not going to change. They're not going to change. Going to be trade more with them, or we have more exchanges. Some places you need to go in and get rid of the bad guys.
But Iraq,
who are the bad guys? How do we know that the rebels now fighting in Libya are going to take over and be stand-up citizens?
Well, you're also having a problem with Iraq. Iraq was very clearly led by bad guys, by villains, and we decapitated that regime. And those people over the long term are going to be a lot better off than we had done nothing.
There are lots of bad guys.
Well, how many lives and how much money did we invest there? And what do we say to the American people? Yes. What do we say to the lives of the mothers and fathers?
We cannot solve all the problems of the world. We cannot solve all the problems of the world.
Thank you.
We're incapable of it. We do our best. We do more than any other country in the world. We can't do everything.
And we actually make enemies in trying to solve the problems of the world.
There are lives of
more enemies.
We have a moral obligation to do so.
No matter how you weigh it,
what is the John, what is the popularity now? What's popularity now of Al-Qaeda-ism right now versus 2001 after these two horribly unpopular wars all throughout the Middle East? If they do polls, could you favor bin Laden? Did you favor? That has gone down dramatically. Everybody else was against these wars and it was going up.
Why don't you address the figure of recruitment and what our opposition to Al-Qaeda has done? It has increased their recruitment.
No, Al-Qaeda actually is not doing that well.
How many people are left with Al-Qaeda? 100?
Let her in.
It was 100.
He was addressing me, excuse me. Al-Qaeda has actually lost a great deal of strength, but jihadism is prevalent around the world, and they're not looking at, what America did in Iraq as saying that did in Al-Qaeda. And there are lots of bad guys in the world. We went into Iraq because we lied and said there were weapons of mass destruction. And what is interesting about this president, he's the first president since John F. Kennedy, I think, to stand up there and really outline a doctrine that says it's no longer bear any burden, pay any price.
You're on your own. The rest of the world, you're on your own. That was his